Good morning, everyone. This is a reading from Whispers from Eternity, a book of prayer demands written by Paramahansa Yogananda. This is prayer demand number 42. I demand to return home. Impediments beware, flee from my path. I am homeward bound. Through the long corridors of time, stumbling often into pits of error, then lifted out by thy unseen hand, I have walked painfully. Discouraging darkness, barbed wire fences of habit, stony embankments of indolence, mountains of indifference, oceans of unfaithfulness, sirens of sense longing may stand even now in my path, as if to prevent my onward march to thy palace. But a million kingdoms and sextillions of years of unblemished worldly happiness will never tempt me again to turn away from thee. Being as I am at age 73 and realizing that whatever lies ahead, I'm in the final stretch here. And something as powerful as that poem really appeals to me now, because I don't have all of the words, but all of what Master talks about there, indifference, desire, and just how it's blocked our path and how much force it takes to say, none of this moving forward will block my path or my return to thee. And I found it this morning, and I just thought, just repeat that until you become it. So powerful and so beautiful and so relevant to this reading for today. There are some lightnesses of being around it. Keshava was setting up the temple for this morning's service, and he was making sure he had the right reading. And it was, I'm going to have to come up with the actual title now, but will God's light be there even where there is ignorance? He read it, and then he said, boy, I sure hope so. I think we all feel that way. It's like, please be there no matter what. We're coming. And then, so sweetly, this happens a lot, but as I said, and I'm sharing with you, I'm in a very particular, focused, committed place in my life, which I'm feeling grateful for. So I was listening to the purification ceremony, and I was just saying to myself, what an amazing inspiration that was through Swamiji to us when it came. To be able to just chant those mantras, and I don't think it was Swamiji that brought this about, but nonetheless, what if we really stopped? 7 times we do this every Sunday, and we just drew that energy up through our chakras. What if we just went further and further into our astral spine, brought that much awareness, focus, concentration, and brought it up and threw it into the fire? Swaha. Take everything that's blocking every chakra, take it back, and brought that extraordinary devotion that we read. You know, that ghee that we put in, it's purified. Everything about this ceremony is, as Viveka Devi said, about transformation and purification. And You know, self-realization, I said this yesterday, we had a Q&A here in the morning, and throughout the course of those 2 hours and answering those questions, every question that came was, I mean, it's silly to say it was so good, but it was so good. And then within the answer is this nugget of our whole path. But at one point, I was saying, self-realization, enlightenment, it doesn't take a lot of time. That's not what it takes. It could be one of those Om Swahas where we get it and we're gone, where we can actually reconnect with that light. Every chant that Biraj chose this morning, Mother, awake me from my dreams. Mother, awake me in thy light. Okay, Mother, awake me from my dreams now. The dream is this world. Please awake me into thy light. Because what is clear in this reading, and what Swamiji talks about, his expanded explanation of this reading is just, for me, particularly perfectly clear, walks us through. I'm going to share a lot of it with you. I have some notes here because I want to share some of it even in his words, because it's so beautiful. But he lets us know, what is this darkness? This was in the reading. How could light shine into darkness and the darkness comprehends it not? It's not even aware of it. There's nothing in these words of John that say they got into a struggle, they fought. No, it's not like that. It's like the darkness was completely ignorant of the light. It comprehended it not. And the darkness has consciousness. Of course it does, because last week the reading was, did God create the world or become it? And of course the answer was, he became it, which means he became it out of his consciousness. So 2 things about that. Everything in creation has an aspect of divine consciousness in it. Everything. It's hard to get that, but with our minds, because we see so much trouble and so much darkness around us, even darkness at this physical plane. But here we are speaking of darkness as a state of consciousness that doesn't notice the light. And Swamiji goes on to say, as he's explaining this further, he says it's that state of consciousness toward which Satan wants to draw us all. It's not Satan, which is, again, important. It's a state of consciousness that Satan is drawing us to constantly, all the time. That's the battle that we're fighting. That's the battle that's here. But what that says is that that light that is God cannot be comprehended by our level of consciousness. They exist, Swamiji says, in 2 entirely different states. So the only way that we can bring ourselves to the light, that we can comprehend the light, that we can live in the light, is to change our consciousness. It really is to commune with that consciousness, to find ways to do that, to lift ourselves up into an entirely different state, because there are 2 states, the light and the dark. The light, of course, representing the light of God. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, was the first reading of the year. Meaning, one way God manifested himself was in the vibration of sound, one of the divine attributes. But light is another. And so it is that divine light that also was made manifest in everything. But it's the divine light cannot be affected by anything that goes on in this world that's other. It will always exist. It exists, that spark of light exists in everything, and it's just waiting to be revealed, which is why these chants and the fire ceremony, and even the song that Keshava just sang, I asked him to bring me the words because I knew I wouldn't remember. But right away in the first verse, it says, your soul is as free as the air. So I'm creating a path here. But when I said enlightenment does not take time, it can happen in a moment because our souls are as free as the air, because that light exists and it's waiting to be revealed. And if we bring enough focus or concentration or open our hearts enough, Swamiji said, for us to say every Sunday, open your hearts to me and I will enter. It's a moment. It's a moment, but we have to genuinely open our hearts, purely, completely open our hearts, at least to attain that state of enlightenment. Now we're on a path, and the more we open our hearts, the more we live in and express devotion. Of course, God comes to us. He wants to come to us, but to take us to that final step, that final place, as Master says so beautifully in his prayer samadhi, enjoyable beyond imagination of expectancy, samadhi, bliss. And that whole, it's such a beautiful little paragraph in that poem, which I am memorizing now, but I'm not quite there yet. He says, not an unconscious state, because that light is also pure consciousness. He says, or mental chloroform without willful return, samadhi but extends my conscious realm. So every time that we try and bring all of our energy to tuning in to that divine light, to that state of consciousness, we're moving further and further into it until we reach that moment, as Master says, to the furthest boundary of eternity, where I, the cosmic sea, watch the little ego floating in me. He's telling us we can all be there. We can attain that, but we can't get there directly from here, which is very interesting. These two states, we cannot reach that state of divine light by working harder in the material world. They don't really connect. We have to go inward. We have to be in a state of communion with that level of consciousness. So many of the questions that were asked yesterday, and I could have asked those questions. Believe me, I know that. They're mine too, which may be why I like doing the Q&As so much. But they are always asking, how can I make the change out here that I want to attain here? And the unfortunate answer is you cannot. You can attain financial security, great relationships, you can better your relationships with your children, all of the questions that were asked. But it doesn't take us to the light because they don't really exist in the same plane. You can be as angry as you want to be. Doesn't affect that divine light. You can be as sorrowful as you are in this world. Doesn't affect that state of joy. You can be as unconscious, as dull as we are in this state. Doesn't affect wisdom. They are always there. When Master said, I killed Yogananda long ago, nothing exists in this temple but God. He told us that. Why was he saying it to us? Because he said, remember, he also said, a saint is a sinner who never gave up. I killed Yogananda means I killed all of my attachments, all of my habits, all of my desires. Nothing exists but God. This is a quantum leap, but it's a leap that we can make, that we're being invited to make. And again, the fire ceremony, the chant, I love these lines where it says, desires are their shackles, the hope that tomorrow the doorway to joy will be found. No, it won't be. Not until we release those desires. Not until we have one desire. Master says very clearly, these are his words, I hope they're exact, that search for God, that quest to move into a deep state of communion that will bring us into the light, he says it's the only thing in life worth working towards. And then he stops and he says, there actually is no other reality. So, yes, God exists everywhere, but the aspect of God that we're moving towards, that we want, is not that God's in our ignorance, because everything is the divine, but to move towards that light. I know I didn't finish this. It's hard to find the words, but I will. Let me just see, so I can finish it. There's joy all around us. Why wait till tomorrow? We've only this moment to live. A heaven within us is ours for the finding, a freedom no riches can give. It's beautiful. It's just what we're talking about. Swamiji says, here, I'll show you here, I'll show you there, I'll show you here, I'll show you everywhere. And I'll repeat it over and over. A heaven within us is ours for the finding. You know, there's several actually, interesting stories that come to mind. But one is a book, I couldn't remember it the other night when I was giving a talk for that Recharge health program. I wanted to. The book is called Proof of Heaven, and it's written by a physician, a neurosurgeon, whose name is Eben Alexander. He had this, he developed meningitis, but they were having trouble making the diagnosis. And it happened to be from a very obscure organism. So it was a particularly bad case. Meningitis is not great under any circumstance, but this was bad. He was in a coma for a week, very near death. But he lived. And when he came back, he started telling his story that he realized when he was sick, he had divine realization. And he got the difference in a doctor's mind between the left brain and the right brain. And he saw that the left brain, which he as a physician, as a neurosurgeon, as all of his colleagues, were always trying to feed and embellish and make stronger, that all it did was take us further and further into what he saw was ego and away from the light. And he spoke about it so beautifully because he, like this next story that I'll tell you briefly, I always forget her name, who wrote Stroke of Insight, but doesn't matter right now. This time, just to honor her, I'll find her name before I finish. But they had the same experience, these prominent, she's a neuroscientist, he's a neurosurgeon. Why I'm telling you his story, though, is because he came back and he said, I was so sure that all of my colleagues would want to know about this. He experienced the light. He said they did not. There is such a hold on us, such a draw towards the darkness, because that darkness is just ignorance, and that ignorance is the illusion that we live with in this world. They're big words, but it's what it means. And yoga, our path, is what takes us out of there. This is the whole of the spiritual path, to learn what we are not. We are not, as when Master said, I killed Yogananda. We're not our ego. We're not all of those qualities. That's what he saw when he was essentially dead, when he was so much more free in the right brain. And he came back like, oh my God, we need to all be working towards this. His colleagues didn't want to hear a word of it. And he knew he was taking a huge risk by even speaking about it, that he could lose all of the professional respect, whatever, that he had won over all of these years. He knew how those colleagues could react. He took that huge risk because he now knew it to be the truth. We are so much more than what we think we are. And they're not just words. We can go there. This woman, Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, who's a neuroscientist, and I spoke about her at this talk that I gave. Find her TED Talk called A Stroke of Insight. It's extraordinary. She, at 37, had a massive bleed into the left side of her brain. She'd been a neuroscientist for years at Harvard, doing great work. So as she was bleeding, she was figuring it out, what was happening. But she was saying that was happening and I would be gone for a while. I couldn't speak of numbers. I didn't know what was going on. I was watching myself lose the function in my arms. And then suddenly, she says, I would be over here in this enormous, expansive place of nirvana. I was free. 37 years of baggage, she said, just left in a moment. She's down on the ground. You have to watch this talk. I'm underdoing it. And she said, it was beautiful. It was perfect. And then I would be over here and I'd be saying, you're in trouble. You need help. Something's going wrong, but wait. And then she'd slip back over here. And then she'd come here and she'd say, she recognized I'm having a stroke. And then she would say to herself, but I'm a very busy woman. I don't have time to have a stroke. She relates this beautifully. And she actually brings a whole brain and she separates it right and left, right? A real brain right onto the stage. And she says, you can see they're totally separate, but we always have the choice. We can choose to just move just to the right of the left side of our brain. It's so beautiful the way she talks. She's trying to say to all of us, I was there. She said the left side of our brain is always telling us, always, this is what makes it hard. I am. I am the academician. I am the intellect. I am Dr. whoever. And she said, it's just the tiniest little bit of who we are. It's so big over here. She said, I kept wondering, how am I ever going to get all of this back into that little body? She's really, but here's the thing. These people come back, and it's very hard to translate that into, I will. Yes, I am. God is everywhere, but I am going to find him in that light. We've been commissioned to do this. I wish I knew all this when I was 23. I often look at my friends here who are in their early 30s, and I just feel, and they have this great blessing. They're on this path early. And I just want to say to all of them, don't be confused. I'm 40 years older than them. 40 years I could have been so serious about this path, about moving towards that level of consciousness. It's very seductive down here. It's not really up and down, but you know. But we are disciples of a great master, and it's a very dark time in the world. Dark is prevailing, and we've already heard it doesn't recognize the light. It's ignorant of it. It's not comprehending it. That light needs to awaken in a different place. Because as Asha said last week, and she kept saying it, it's like a shadow, and it may not notice the light, but with enough light, the shadow changes. And that is the truth. It's only our perception of the light and the dark that's off. The light's there all the time. We're just not perceiving it. We need to go through that change. You know, we just finished this course, Church of All Religions. We've talked about it a lot. But it really touched me because I knew this in the I am simple Dr. Shanti Rubenstone with a left brain. I knew what I'm about to say, but I didn't get it the way I got it going through that course. We are disciples of Yogananda, all of Ananda. Ananda's not that big in the world. We're growing, and we're powerful, and we're doing everything we can do to live in the light and to send that light out everywhere. But when you look at the number of people in the world and who we are, not a huge number. But then I realized there are so many beautiful souls. There are all of these Sufis. There are all of these people living Kabbalah. There are all of these mystical Christians. It just goes on and on. Sanatana Dharma exists, and self-realization is alive in many, many souls. So our work is being aided and abetted. We're part of a huge network. That was very uplifting and relieving to me. And what we need to do, when Richard Wurmbrand was in prison, he was put in solitary confinement for some number of years. I didn't read it recently. I just glanced at something on the internet that said 3 years, but I've also heard 14 years, so I don't know. But let's just say it was only 3 years. Solitary confinement, 12 to 16 feet below the ground, no windows, no light. The guards put felt on the bottom of their shoes so there was no sound. All of this was meant to drive these people crazy. But what he did was extraordinary, and that's really the lesson in this reading. I mean, he went through much more. I don't need to talk about it right now. But suffice it to say, as if this wasn't enough, he was being tortured regularly in horrific ways. He just decided that he was going to be with God. He knew God. He was going to get as close to God as he could. He slept all day, and at night he would stay up, and every night he wrote a sermon in his mind, and then he delivered it. When he came out, he remembered 350 of them. He remembered his sermons, and he put them into a book. And he, at first, would tap out Morse code to communicate with some of the other people and give sermons and talk about God in that way at times. He was the light. He refused to be in the darkness. Imagine, under that circumstance, we can all do that. He became the light, and we can all be that light. We just have to remember and do it now and bring as much as we can, whatever we're doing it, whenever we're praying, whenever we're meditating, whenever we're throwing ghee into the fire, whenever we're singing these beautiful songs or listening to chants, let's take those moments and say, okay, for this 5 minutes, for this hour, whatever it is, I will be here. I will do everything I can do to keep my awareness and my focus on God as light. And then God can come. And then God can be with us. And then he can add his effort to ours. And we can awake into that light.
Brother, I've a faint suspicion you and I've been led astray, taught to drive the devil from us. We've invited him to stay. What we need is light, for you can't drive out the darkness with a stick. With a stick, no, we can't drive out the devil with a stick. Some proclaim all men are sinners, can't escape the devil's might. How their interest must intrigue him, they won't let him out of sight. What we need is light, for we can't drive out the darkness, talking sin, no, we can't drive out the devil, talking sin. Some of us were taught the slogan, social evils must be slain. But can anger drive out sorrow? How can passion conquer pain? What we need is light, for we can't drive out the darkness while we hate. No, we can't drive out the devil while we hate. Brother, have you ever wondered why the darkness lingers on? If we want to see the sunrise, let us turn and face the dawn. What we need is light, for we'll only best the darkness when we love. Yes, we'll only best the devil when we love.